අද්විතීය 200 Mbps ස්පීඩ් එකකින් ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ වේගවත්ම සහ පුළුල්තම හෝම් බ්‍රෝඩ්බෑන්ඩ් සම්බන්ධතාවය වන SLT මොබිටෙල් දේශීය ෆයිබර් බලවේගය ඔබත් අදම අත්විඳින්න.
හරිම සුදුයි.
Tonight on First at 9, this Thursday the 30th of March 2023. Same coin. President Ranil Wickremesinghe says that Sri Lanka has the final opportunity to progress, emphasises that the ethnic issue and the economic issue are not two separate issues.
We've been missing on all opportunities for restructuring. This is the last chance. Are we going to take it or not? And let's press the accelerator to the floor.
Oversight. It is important to include monitoring and evaluation in the government's decision-making process, says opposition leader Sajith Premadasa, and highlights that the principle of separation of power needs to be maintained.
Monitoring and evaluation will enhance rule of law. The separation of powers principle has to be protected and enhanced.
Postponed. Supreme Court postpones hearing of the Treasury Secretary's contempt of court petitions to May.
Alliance Finance මෙතුරු රන්නයි සේවාවෙන් රන් පවුම්කට රුපියල් 1,70,000ක ඉහළ අධිකාරම.
ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දිනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබාගත හැක.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9 with Andrew Bernard. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very good evening and welcome to AdaDerana 24's English News. In your top story for tonight, President Ranil Wickremesinghe says that Sri Lanka has a final opportunity to progress and it is imperative for everyone to collaborate in operating this prosperous community for future generations without resorting to finger-pointing. Delivering the keynote address of the Forum Economic Dialogue, IMF and the Way Beyond, the head of state expressed that the government should surpass the IMF program and concentrate on establishing a thriving community for upcoming generations. Further, President Wickremesinghe also said that the ethnic issue cannot be separated from the economic issue, adding that they must be resolved if Sri Lanka is to prosper. The Forum Economic Dialogue, IMF and Beyond, organised by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka, was held in Colombo this morning under the patronage of President Ranil Wickremesinghe.
All of us are responsible for the situation we are in today. We must remember that. We cannot run away from that responsibility. We must all bear that. What we have to do now is ensure that the next generation will live in a prosperous society. What is our task? It's not merely to stabilize the economy, but to ensure growth, to grow in this new global economy and to go ahead. We must remember that one of the biggest issues that held back our growth is the ethnic issue. We cannot divorce that issue from the economic issues. We are a democracy. Open debate is useful. We have to discuss and debate these issues. And discussion must take place in the halls of discussion from parliament downwards, not in the streets. That type of agitation is no longer suitable for a country and goes on development. But the decision is ours to take, not for the government to enforce. The IMF package, it will bring about a significant revenue-based fiscal adjustment based on progressive tax reforms to raise Sri Lanka's revenue to GDP ratio. It's a progressive one so that we gradually reduce the tax burden on the poor who has to bear the brunt of the VAT system. Better public expenditure and debt management through essential institutional reforms and enhanced social safety net to cushion the poor, restoring price stability and a market-determined flexible exchange rate and rebuilding our international reserves. Then ensuring financial stability through a healthy banking system. What we are seeking is to stabilize the economy by 2026. Come back virtually the same ratios we had in 2019. Approval of this program will allow Sri Lanka to commence negotiations with private and official creditors on restructuring its debt in line with the parameters set by the IMF Debt Sustainable Assessment. and also the commitments that I have made with my letter of March 14th. We hope to conclude the discussions and arrive at a comprehensive restructuring agreement with the creditors by the time the first review under the EFF in 6 months takes place. The 4-year program, that is not enough. If you want to give a future to your children, if you want to give a future to the youth, then we have to go forward. Because Sri Lanka is today at the crossroads between seizing the opportunity for growth to fix our long-standing institutions and structural problems to become a prosperous society, or denying our problems, rejecting change, and stagnating as a low and middle income country. Implementing this program is how we seize the opportunity for a more prosperous future. What is most important in the IMF additions to stabilization is the growth-enhancing structural reforms. If we don't do these structural reforms, you can write it out, and next time it's going to be a far more violent uprising. And we must boldly go ahead with these structural reforms, which will unlock our growth potential, put on a high growth trajectory. That's the only way out. So we have to reduce the role of the government in the economy to increase efficient resource allocation, competition and productivity. We must not look at government to bail everything out. Then further trade liberalization, including rationalizing remaining para-tariffs. The world global economy is going to be more competitive. We have to adjust to it. The labor market reforms, which will enable more females to join the labor force. As our population age, it is necessary that more females join the labor force. Remove the impediments to private investment, including by modernizing the regulatory and doing business environment. And what I am aiming in the next 2 years to lay the groundwork for a highly competitive social market economy. So we'd like to upgrade our FTA with India to economic and technical cooperation agreement and join the RCEP. High level of competition means an efficient government structure. Our potential for green economy at the moment is good. A digital economy. Start the digitalization. Start with Western province where 50% of your economy is. Spread out to the other areas of high economic activity. Then cover the rest of the country. Let us modernize agriculture and fisheries. That's the start of another low-hanging fruit. Sri Lanka becoming a regional logistics center, the offshore potential for the offshore economy. All these are matters to be discussed. So we must take this chance. We can't wait. Because we've been missing on all opportunities for restructuring. This is the last chance. Are we going to take it or not? So all I request of you is to make up your mind that we are going to grow. And this is the last chance, and let's press the accelerator to the floor. And there's nothing else that we can do.
Now, opposition leader Sajith Premadasa says that the evaluation and monitoring processes need to be included in the government decision-making process to ensure that sound and effective policies emerge as outputs. Addressing the 2023 Asia-Pacific Regional Workshop of the International Programme for Development Evaluation, Premadasa also highlighted the importance of protecting the principle of separation of powers, which is necessary for the establishment of a sound evaluation and monitoring processes.
The 2023 Asia-Pacific Regional Workshop of the International Programme for Development Evaluation was held in Parliament today.
So if the main decision-making body of a country, which is basically the government of the country, if the government does not embark in including proper evaluation processes and strategies in the governmental decision-making process, then you have bad policy as policy outputs. You don't achieve sound policy. So I think it's extremely important that we ensure that the evaluation and monitoring processes are included in the governmental decision-making process. And here in Sri Lanka, by the government, I mean the President, the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, and the other members at ministerial levels that are represented in Parliament. I do believe fervently that evaluation monitoring processes at both the executive and legislative levels will form the quintessential bedrock for successful policymaking. We all believe in good governance. Monitoring and evaluation will enhance rule of law. It will strengthen accountability, transparency, and the participatory aspect of government. Most important of all, monitoring and evaluation will allow all of us to prevent corruption, to prevent bribery, to prevent misuse of state assets and state properties. So while agreeing that monitoring and evaluation is a very important aspect, a crucial aspect of a successful decision-making process, I sometimes wonder, do we walk the talk? Even though our country has commenced the process, we are yet to see its ultimate implementation. And I sometimes wonder whether we have the political conviction, the strength, the determination to see and ensure that this dream of having monitoring and evaluation actually becomes a practical reality in day-to-day governance. Within the tripartite system, we have the system of separation of powers, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. The separation of powers principle, the checks and balances, these norms and conventions, rules and regulations. Today, unfortunately, the autonomy which these three branches of government has enjoyed has become clouded due to various interventions and various decision making by certain actors in the policy making processes. The separation of powers principle has to be protected and enhanced. Within that context, I fervently believe the establishment of monitoring, evaluation, and also feedback will become a very important change in our system of government.
Now, the High Commissioner of Sri Lanka to India, Milinda Moragoda, and the Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, Shaktikanta Das, discussed on ways how India can support towards economic recovery of Sri Lanka. During their meeting, they also discussed on a range of issues pertaining to the bilateral economic cooperation.
The High Commissioner of Sri Lanka to India, Milinda Moragoda, called on the Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, Shaktikanta Das, yesterday at the bank's headquarters in Mumbai. Discussions were held between both parties on a range of issues pertaining to the bilateral economic cooperation. High Commissioner Moragoda thanked Governor Das for the support that India has extended to Sri Lanka in the context of economic stabilization, particularly the currency swap arrangements and deferment of payments that materialized with the direct involvement of the Reserve Bank of India. The RBI Governor and the High Commissioner discussed economic recovery in Sri Lanka and the pivotal role that India could play in it through greater integration of the economies in areas such as power, energy, ports, infrastructure, tourism, IT and services. The ways and means to enhance bilateral trade, particularly through the Indian rupee trade expansion as a key pillar of economic rival in Sri Lanka, were discussed between both parties as well.
Now, the Supreme Court announced today that the dates of the petitions filed against the Treasury Secretary for allegations of contempt of court will be taken up again on the 22nd of May. The Supreme Court made this announcement today after the Attorney General requested for more time to be given to file the documents necessary for the case.
The Supreme Court issued an interim order against the Secretary to the Treasury, Mahinda Siriwardana, on the 3rd of March, calling for the release of funds allocated through the budget for the local government election. However, two petitions were filed at the Supreme Court alleging that the Treasury Secretary had been in contempt of court as he had not complied with the interim order of the Supreme Court. The petitions had been filed by General Secretary of the Samgi Janabalawege Ranjit Madhuma Bandara and the National People's Power MP Vijitha Herath. When the petitions were taken before the court today, the Attorney General presented the facts before the court and requested for time to file the documents relevant to the case. The 5-member judge bench, consisting of Chief Justice Jayanta Jayasuriya, allowed the Attorney General's request and announced that the petitions will be taken up again for consideration on the 22nd of May.
දිගින් දිගටම රජය උත්සාහ කරන්නේ මේ මැතිවරණය කල් දාන්න. ඉතින් අපි ජනතාවගේ ප්‍රජාතන්ත්‍රවාදී අයිතිය වෙනුවෙන් පෙනී සිටින මේ කටයුතු කරනවා.
ඔබතුමාලගේ කට්ටිය දැත් ශක්තිමත් කරන්න යයිද රනිල් වික්‍රමසිංහ ජනතාව?
අපි එහෙම දිගින් දිගටම කියන අපේ යනවා කියලා. එහෙම යන පාටක් පේන්නේ නැහැ.
අපි රනිල් වික්‍රමසිංහ කිව්වනේ යනවා කියලා එයා. සෞඛ්‍ය අමාත්‍යකම දුන්නොත් එහෙම.
ඔව් එහෙම එක්කෙනෙක් දෙන්නෙක් ඇති. තනතුරු ලාභ සඳහා පක්ෂේ පාවා දෙනවට අපි
Now, the Human Rights Watch has urged the Sri Lankan government to ensure that policies implemented to enhance revenues do not further erode economic and social rights of the people and that anti-corruption reforms provide accountability. They further highlighted that the IMF bailout package program has the risks that compromise the economic and social rights of the people.
Expressing skepticism about the $3 billion bailout package recently approved by the International Monetary Fund to help Sri Lanka resolve the economic crisis, the Human Rights Watch said this program has structured risks, further undermining the people's economic and social rights. South Asian Director of Human Rights Watch, Meenakshi Ganguly, stressed that Sri Lankans who were struggling to make ends meet should not have to carry the burden, as the economic crisis was a result of the official corruption and tax rules that benefited the wealthiest in the country. The human rights body called on the international financial institutions, including the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank, and donors to insist on transparent rights respecting governance in the country. The IMF program's focus on increasing government revenues rather than reducing public spending as a percentage of gross domestic product will better protect the rights, the Human Rights Watch said, adding that while some of the new measures are designed to increase taxes on the wealthy and eliminate tax exemptions, the heavy reliance on value-added taxes can worsen the cost of living crisis. The Human Rights Watch statement went on to say that while the wealthy pay more VAT in absolute terms because they spend more, the expense makes up much greater share of the income for low-income people. The Human Rights Watch went on to urge the government to publish data on the percentage of the population that is subject to income taxes under this change and to consider advancing the introduction of taxes on property, gifts and inheritance, which the program mandates by 2025. The Human Rights Watch said that to protect the rights when removing subsidies and introducing taxes for fossil fuels, the government should adequately invest in social protection, the use of renewable energy sources, and other measures to move towards a rights-aligned economy. The Human Rights Watch further raised concerns about the insistence on targeting benefits based on eligibility criteria, which also risks continuing to exclude people who are unable to access goods and services essential for an adequate standard of living.
Stay with us for more news right after this short commercial break.
ගොඩමඩ පෙරලි කරන බලපුළුවන් කාරයා මහින්ද්‍රා යුවෝ ඩීමෝ වෙතින්.
Apico Super Center, Arudu Super Shopper. Amazing 50% discounts. Shop for 7,500 rupees or more with an Apico Privilege card, including 5 nominated brands.
Let's go! Apico Super Center.
අසම සම සන්නාමයක ශක්තිමත් බව ෆිෂ් ඒ මූල්‍ය වර්ගීකරණය හිමිකරගත් එකම රක්ෂණ ආයතනය. පස්වන වරටත් ග්‍රෑන්ඩ් ෆයිනෑන්සි වැඩිම වටිනාකමකින් යුත් සාමාන්‍ය රක්ෂණ සන්නාමය සහ ඉහළම ජනාදරයට පත් වූ රක්ෂණ සන්නාමය ශ්‍රී ලංකා ඉන්ෂුරන්ස්.
Welcome back. Now, a minor tremor of magnitude 3.7 was recorded in the sea areas off the coast of Beruala this afternoon. The Geological Survey and Mines Bureau, however, assured that there's no potential threat of danger and urged the public to not panic.
A minor tremor of magnitude 3.7 on the Richter scale was recorded in the sea area off the coast of Beruala in the Kalutara district this afternoon. Speaking to AdaDerana English News, senior seismologist at the Geological Survey and Mines Bureau, Nilmini Thaldana, meanwhile confirmed that there is no tsunami threat to the island following the tremors. She further assured that there is no potential threat of danger and urged the public not to panic.
Today at around 1 p.m. local time, a magnitude 3.7 tremor occurred around 24 km away from Beruala. This event was recorded by seismic monitoring facilities operated by the GSMB, and it was reported that people living in Beruala, Kalutara, Panadura and Piliyandala area felt it. There is no tsunami threat from this magnitude 3.7 tremor.
Earlier this month, a similar incident was reported when 2 minor tremors with magnitude of 3 and 2.6 on the Richter scale jolted the eastern and southern parts of Sri Lanka. This month's tremors comes in a backdrop where several other incidents of minor tremors were reported from the Monaragala, Vallavaya and Buttal areas of the island last month.
The Minister of Industries, Dr. Ramesh Patrana, says that it is important to allocate from the funds of the budget to the industries since it is the only way to boost growth during a crisis-hit period. Addressing an event organized by the University of Sri Jayawardhanapura, Dr. Patrana highlighted that the importance of protecting Sri Lankan industries by providing necessary assistance from the side of the government.
If you consider last year, we have spent about nearly 350 billion rupees for the defense sector of this country. It's the same this year. For last 20-30 years, our defense expenditure has gone up a lot. The capital investment for education sector was nearly 250 billion rupees, whereas we have spent about 300 billion rupees for the health sector development. And we spent another 50 billion for the agricultural sector development, another 40 billion for the irrigation, another 10 billion for the plantation sector development. But unfortunately, if you look at the government expenditure for the industrial development, it's a mere 5 to 6 billion rupees annually. That's why partly our industrial sector was lagging behind. So it's necessary, as policymakers, that's our prime duty, but country had seen other important matters, including health and education and infrastructure development as their priorities. But now we have realized, at the time of economic calamity, unless you develop the manufacturing sector of the country, unless you develop the entrepreneurship of the country has no future. Like the silver lining of the dark cloud, Sri Lankan manufacturers had come forward to assemble cars in Sri Lanka during last 2 years because we did not import cars from the other countries. So 10 manufacturers assemble cars in Sri Lanka now. More importantly, some of them are connected to the global value chain. We do develop wire harness, batteries locally made, tires are locally made, seats are locally made, exhaust is locally made. Apart from gearbox and the engine, most of these other components are locally manufactured. That is the way forward, and we need to connect that to the global value chain. So we had seen that development gradually taking place, but importantly, we must ensure that we develop a ring fencing mechanism to ensure these industries are protected. So we know that IMF is putting forward certain conditions. You have to remove your import restrictions gradually, and you have to connect with the World Trade Organization, some of the parameters they provide. But it is important that we provide some assistance, safety mechanism to Sri Lankan industries. We have seen development of some of the sectors during last couple of years' time, which we need to invest and protect on the long run. Whatever the industrial ministry could do in relation to policy making and also to safeguard some of the industries in this country, we would do utmost with the help of yours.
Now, Sri Lankan shares ended lower today, dragged down by communication services and the financial stocks. The all-share price index fell 0.47% to 9,228.5. The S&P SL20 ended at 2,664.26, following a loss of 0.34%. Sri Lanka Telecom PLC and LOLC Finance PLC were the top drags on the index, down 7% and 1.6% respectively. The trading volume for the all-share price index fell 0.7 million shares from about 49.2 million in the previous session. The market turnover fell to 912.7 million Sri Lankan rupees or $2.78 million from 1.46 billion rupees in the previous session. The banking sector was the top contributor to the market turnover, while food, beverage and tobacco sector was the second highest. Foreign investors were net sellers in the equity market, offloading 117.9 million rupees worth of shares, while domestic investors were net buyers, purchasing stocks worth 885.2 million rupees. Now let's take a look at how the Sri Lankan rupee traded against other major currencies during the day. Now, China and Brazil have reached a deal to trade in their own currencies, ditching the US dollar as an intermediary. The deal, which follows a preliminary agreement in January, was announced after a high-level China-Brazil business forum in Beijing.
The deal will enable China, the world's second-largest economy, and Brazil, the biggest economy in Latin America, to conduct their massive trade and financial transactions directly, exchanging yuan for Brazilian real and vice versa, instead of going through the dollar. In a statement, the Brazilian Trade and Investment Promotion Agency said the expectation is that this will reduce costs and promote even greater bilateral trade and facilitate investment. China is Brazil's biggest trading partner with a record $150.5 billion in bilateral trade last year. The deal, which follows a preliminary agreement in January, was announced after a high-level China-Brazil business forum in Beijing. Brazilian President Lula da Silva was originally scheduled to attend the forum as part of a high-profile China visit, but had to postpone his trip indefinitely Sunday after he came down with pneumonia. Brazilian officials said the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China and Bank of Communications (BBM) will execute the transactions. China has similar currency deals with Russia, Pakistan and several other countries.
And that's all the news we have for you this evening. Join us again tomorrow for the very latest news at the very same time. A pleasant evening and good night.
For news and information you can trust 24 hours a day, visit AdaDerana.lk.